Okay, so we're going to look at in this video the to and R on a PICs debate. Okay, so the first thing we should talk about real quick is why is the PIC so strategic? Obviously, you have a policy background, so you understand this. Do you want to give an explanation?
Sure, because it allows the negative to co-opt a lot of the affirmative offense with pointing out something that the affirmative is not used to. For example, like if the affirmative is like defending a living wage, the negative can say we should do a living wage except for this. So like first co-opts like affirmative offense, and second allows the affirmative to debate something the negative is more prepped on than the have, presumably.
Presumably, right. So let's take the living wage example you gave, right? Let's say AF says give living wage to everyone in the U.S., right? Example of a strategic pick could be let's give everyone a living wage in the U.S. except for people under the age of 25.
Sure.
And the biggest benefit there would be education, right? That people under the age of 25 have a unique upward mobility, that they have the ability to be educated and to get an education and to get a career that is very stable. However, in a world of a living wage, they're incentivized to stay at their be it their fast food job or their healthcare job, because they're making enough to support their living, or something like that, right? That's just one example. Or it could also be like yeah, that was an actual pick written by my old student Dan for TSC this year.
Cool.
Yeah, so it's a really what that does is two things. A, it makes all of the affirmative's advantages non-unique for the most part. Now the affirmative just gets to draw the poverty disad and the rather the poverty advantage based on people from the age of 18 to 25. Instead of getting to access that everyone is going to be more poor in the neg world, the AF now only gets to access that people from the age of 18 to 25 are going to be more poor, right? And the second thing is the neg has now zoomed in the focus of the debate onto one specific instance in which living wages should not be given. And the way it's been able to zoom in on it is by agreeing with every other instance. So basically the neg was like, look, bro, I agree with everything you just said except this one part. And so now the AF has to show that the one part the neg disagrees with is actually a bad thing, or sorry, is actually a good thing for the AF, right? Like, i.e., that we should have living wages for the one part, and the neg just needs to show that we should not have living wages for that one part. So, like, a lot of camps right now over summer are debating this democracy promotion topic, right? They're saying that, like, the U.S. ought to promote democracy in the Middle East. A pick would say, like, we should promote democracy in the Middle East in all instances except this particular one, i.e., like, perhaps we shouldn't promote it in Syria because there's a risk of insurgent revolution right now, and democracy promotion would accelerate that process. So essentially now what the neg would do is it agrees with the majority of the AF's advantages, and so it co-opts those advantages, right? So in terms of being the negative, a pick is awesome, right? Normally negatives defend the converse of the resolution, i.e. they say that we should never have living wages, or that we should not have living wages in the predominant amount of situations, right? If the AF is an on-balance AF, i.e. it says we should have living wages more often than not, the neg is usually an on-balance neg, i.e. we should have living wages less often than not.
So a pick would violate converse?
A pick most certainly violate converse, right? Converse says if the AF is a whole res AF and it says we should have living wages always, then the converse would be that we should not have living wages, or like we should never have living wages. Does that make sense? And that doesn't mean, converse doesn't mean neg can't read a CP, right? Neg still gets a counterplan. It can still offer some economic solution other than a pick. It doesn't have to like say that we should just stay in the status quo and keep a minimum wage, but it could defend something like tax incentives or tax cuts, or there were a bunch of CPs on the living wage debate, right? All of those are pretty much fair game, except for counterplans that say let's also give living wages.
Sure.
So your counterplan can't be plan inclusive. So basically, a pick is a counterplan. It just can't include any portion of the plan. Cool. So in a world where we read a pick, and this is a strategy that we're going to explore more extensively this coming season because it's something that the debate can be scripted out for. In a world where we read the pick, what should the one end not do?
The one should not.
It should not turn the af. Because if you draw disadvantages to affirming, those are also disadvantages to negating,
Yeah,
since you agree with the af in that situation.
Sure, but that's like non-unique, right? Because the disadvantage applies to both modes. Wouldn't it just give you like an extra out if you don't want to go for the pick? You could still go for the turns out AC.
Okay, good. So what you just said is that turning the af is potentially not a bad decision because it gives you a second out, right? However, let's think about what that means. That means A, the pick had to have been conditional because you can kick it come the 2 and R. And it also means B, you're conceding you're making contradictory arguments in the one end. I.e., you're saying that I agree with the af is a good idea in all situations but this one. Also, the af is a bad idea in all of those situations because of this. Do you see how it's contradictory?
Okay. Yeah.
Right? You put the 1AR in a situation where it's arguing against itself.
Sure. Yeah.
And the reason why is because you were arguing against yourself. Basically, you said, I advocate 90% of X and 10% of Y, and then you also gave a bunch of reasons why advocating X is a bad thing.
That could be a good intern. Like, you can't beat a pick if you turn on AC.
Yeah, I think that there are very nuanced 1AR interps on picks, and that's something we will explore later in another video. But the point is that no one should be able to do those nuanced interps against you.
Sure.
Because you don't want to make those mistakes.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? So a really strategic way in which so the first thing is the biggest rule of thumb when you're reading a pick is make sure you're not reading contradictory arguments on the AC, i.e. For the purposes of the discussion, it almost always means you should not be turning the af. Right? So then the question becomes, let's say the pick is 3 minutes to 4 minutes long. What do you do with the other 3 minutes? Right? If you can't turn the af, what do you do?
Read like theory.
So you could uplayer by reading theory. You could uplayer by reading a K, and the pick could be the net benefit to the K, or it could also be the alternative of the K, right? So like,
You could run an NC too.
yeah, you could run an NC too, but presumably you wouldn't get the link into the NC, right? Because you're agreeing with the AF in the majority of situations.
Yeah. True. But what if like the NC was focused on that one? That's really rare. Though.
Then that's a K.
Sort of, I guess. Yeah.
Like if you on the democracy promotion topic, for example, if you read a K of the Middle East, or like let's say you read a word pick, right? And your word pick is let's promote democracy in the regions between India, like east of India, west of India and east of Istanbul, instead of the Middle East. So your biggest benefits is like a discursive advantage to not using the words Middle East, because the words Middle East are presumably hegemonic or imperialist or whatever, right? In that situation, you could read a K of like hegemonic discourse, and your alternative could be the pick.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So the other thing that you often have to do in a world of the pick is you have to make sure that your advantage to the pick, i.e. the reason the pick is a good thing, is something that their framework doesn't exclude.
Right.
So if they read a Deont framework and your pick draws a util advantage, you have to engage in the framework debate to make sure you're getting access to the util advantage. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So given that we have established how strategic a pick is, let's take a wild guess at what the predominant 1AR strategy is against a pick.
It's so bad.
Theory, exactly. Now, traditionally it comes in the form of picks are bad, with a combination of several planks, such as they must be either disclosed, or they must have a solvency advocate, or they must have a certain amount of articles written on them, or they must have...
It's pretty hard to verify.
It is definitely hard to verify a certain amount of articles. I've seen that interp before, though, and they had a screenshot of Google Scholar, which is one way to go about verifying it. Additionally, the other plank is combining, you cannot read a pick if you also do X. So if you also read a theory shell, or if you also uplayer in one other way, or if you turn the AC. I think the last section of interps that we just discussed in terms of how the 1AR approaches it are usually the most strategic. Okay? Now, I think the 1AR doesn't take seriously enough the option of just substantively engaging the pick. Because if they read a pick and they read it properly and they don't turn it themselves on the AF, then all you'd have to do in the under 25 example would be to show that people underneath the age of 25 should have living wages. Right? Now, obviously the sort of strategic disincentive is you know that they're probably well frontline on this, and there's a high chance you don't have the cards on this. Right? But if you can analytically engage on this for a minute or two, I think that becomes really strategic for you. Does that make sense? Now, theory is obviously also a predominant strategy here, and justifiably so. Picks are fair in policy, they make a lot more sense because the rounds are longer, there's more speeches, and the topics last longer, which means that both sides get to prep more instances of the resolution.
I don't think that there's still plenty of theory on the kind of basic counterplans, but it's just like it's more often run.
Yeah, exactly. Picks are a much more accepted strategy in policy than they are in LD. And the reason why is because LD rounds are much shorter, because argument development is much less, and because there's much less clash on these issues, and also the topic is less, so that drastically increases research burdens.
Yeah, topic.
Yeah. Okay, so what we're going to practice is the 2 and R on a picks debate. Okay? Now, obviously the 2 and R needs to win the advantage of the pick. It needs to extend the pick proper. And then it needs to take care of all other up layers. The predominant up layer is usually theory. Right? So we can safely expect that this 2 and R will have about 4 to 4.5 minutes devoted towards theory. Cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a 1AR shell that's pretty extensive. It's written by my old student Tom, and we're going to see how you deal with it in 4 minutes. Now, the one thing that should definitely be kept in mind here is rejecting the argument versus rejecting the debater is actually a quite interesting strategy here. Because if you reject the argument, what that means is you no longer get access to the plan-inclusive counterplan, but that means you still get access to the advantage, right? Because the advantage still represents a situation in which we don't do the AF.
Oh, sure, yeah. Oh, yeah. And you can weigh that against the ATF. But you presumably didn't do that in the 1.
So presumably that should be there in the 1 end then.
Oh, yeah.
So the key point here,
Yeah,
so I want to reiterate that because it's really important. It's really important we understand that, is that a plan-inclusive counterplan could have been read as just a disad, right? You didn't need to include all of the AF. You could have still read the disad to the portion of the AF you don't want to do, and you could have defended the whole res on the neg. However, you decided not to do so because you're a shady clash-avoiding debater, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. We can be shady and avoid clash whenever we deem it to be most strategic to do so. But the bottom line is, given that you could have read the pick as a DA and it would have responded to the AF still, the pick part was just sort of like like a middle finger to the AF. And it's just like, screw you, I'm taking most of your ground, right? And so it's really important here, if the neg is going to do that, to also weigh its advantage against the AF advantages, because that means that the 2 and R can sit hard on reject the argument versus reject the debater, and that gives it a huge nib that the 2AR has to respond to.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I also think the reasonability competing interrupts debate here is less strategic on picks than it normally is on other debates, because picks are almost always pretty unreasonable.
Yeah.
Right? So reasonability makes a lot more sense in a debate like the debate round we just observed today between me and Ben, right? Then it makes a lot more sense in that round than it does in this round. Cool?
Yeah.
So the other goal is the 2 and R here is definitely trying to spread out the AF. You want to make the theory debate impossible.
Yeah.
And so ideally this 2 and R should be scripted.
Oh, sure.
There's a pretty limited set of arguments for why picks are bad. So we want to script it as much as possible. Cool?
Yeah.
Any questions?
No, I'm good. Wait, just let me type.
I'm ready.
I understood.
Interpretation. Negative positions may not include parts of the affirmative violation. You read a pick. Confirmed in cross-examination standards. 1 is ground. A point is they kill. Their pick kills my philosophical ground when they are able to do almost the same action as the affirmative. My incentives for justifying a philosophical framework literally go away, given that I would never have a strategic advantage to debate underneath it. Philosophical ground comes first. A point is LD. Debate is by definition of values. Debate my interp most directly impacts back to the purpose of the event because it preserves a realm of philosophy key to assessing values. B point is philosophical discussion outweighs because it transcends this topic. Talking about this topic won't be useful in any other resolution, but an understanding of rights entailing ethical theories will. Additionally, in philosophical discussions, better trains us to think critically because it forces us to engage in discussions that we otherwise might not have been introduced to. B point is that picks kill my advantage ground as I'm not able to leverage any advantages to beat back the net benefits as they are able to completely solve for them. This means that the pick kills AC ground, which is most important because A, it is my original advocacy. I'm not able to shift into the next speech, and B, I'm never able to read a 7-minute coherently focused position that leverages all of its advantages from one semantic argument, meaning picks make it literally impossible to affirm. C point is that the ground is not reciprocal as the neg is able to co-opt and steal the majority of my affirmative arguments and then come up with unique benefits based upon my position, whereas I am not able to co-opt theirs given the structure of the pick. This means that even if I do have some ground, it's unreciprocal as I can never co-opt the benefits to reciprocity. Key to fairness as both debaters need an equal threshold for the ballot. Even if I do pick this AF case, the problem with picks may not necessarily be the ground I have, but my inability to co-opt some of the neg advantages too. My inability to co-opt neg advantages puts them on a higher playing field. Second standard is predictable limits. There are literally an infinite number of minute distinctions, actors, policy options, or words that can be substituted for the 1AC plan text. It doesn't matter whether or not their pick is predictable because it falls into a subset of categories that are not. I cannot predict every possible pick. My argument is not that their specific pick is unpredictable, but rather that all arguments must fall within predictable limits, and plan-inclusive counterplans do not. Moreover, this kills research burdens, as even if their pick is possibly conceivable, there's no reason why I would have had an idea to research about it, given the infinite amount of others that I could have possibly had to research. This means they make it impossible to research and prepare, given there would be an infinite number of arguments necessary to prep. Also, given that there is an infinite research burden, my ability to have quality evidence and have prepared responses to their pick, just like they are prepped on, is unreciprocal too, meaning I have no reasonable ability to debate their pick. Third standard is real-world education. When comparing the preferability of policy options, our comparison does not calculate every possible benefit and disadvantage. Rather, in the real world, we use satisficing. Smith. Satisficing is an algorithm for making a decision. Consider the available choices one at a time until an option is found that is good enough. The winner is the first candidate that meets your minimum requirements. The cognitive processes required for satisficing are very different from those required by an expected utility calculation, and they require much less effort. Considerable evidence from experiments and field studies indicates that satisficing strategies provide a more valid description of everyday decision-making behavior than does the expected utility model. It is usually simply not worth it to expand more effort to improve the outcome by a small amount. Someone who obsessively seeks optimal situations is downright irrational. End quote. Thus, policymakers don't evaluate minute permutations on policy options. Rather, they decide when something is just good enough and move on from there, meaning picks are inconsistent with real-world policymaking. Further, this means that textually prefer the AC to the pick as it was offered first and is reasonably a good enough option and beneficial. This means this argument functions substantively as a reason to accept the plan and vote for me. This comes before a comparative clash of individual arguments because, as per Smith, if we can't compare end states, that means that whichever plan is offered first is sufficient. Fourth is time skew. Plan-inclusive counterplan renders the AC useless since my opponent agrees with the AC in every situation but the advantage he advocates. This gives the affirmative 7 minutes to engage the advantage the negative advocates, while the neg has 7 minutes to develop the advantage and 6 to defend it. Bad division of time violates fairness because arguments don't matter if you don't have time to make them. Time skew most important standard in the round because if you don't have time to make arguments, you can't debate, making it a prerequisite to all their standards.
Prep, how much?
Take 5 minutes. Okay, so what's the order going to be?
Overview, then line. I'll read a counter interpret at the top.
Is the 2-hour overview going to be long?
No, short.
Short, okay.
Ready?
Indeed.
Education Education outweighs fairness. The A points are duration. Education lasts with us the entire life, and fairness only matters in this round. The B points are role of the judges to be an educator. E, many keys living are arguments why fairness outweighs. You should stick to your role as a judge because that's what you represent. You're supposed to teach us as students, as debaters. The C point is that the totally impact of fairness is winning. However, we really care about winning. We just buy ourselves big POC trophies, which we clearly don't do. Counter-interpretation, they can read a pick if the A points that have the affirmative plan, the B points that just goes online. C points a solvency advocate with a PhD on the field. The D points that pick out of a specific H group on a living age topic on the ground argument. One turn, I need to pick ground because sometimes affirmatives are simply just sometimes affirmatives are just true. I need picks in order to leverage my ground in order to focus on a specific part of it. Second turn, if you read a plan, you're parametricizing the resolution, which means that I should get to parametricize what your plan is talking about, which turns your reciprocity argument. Your reciprocity argument only assumes when you don't read a plan. On philosophical education, one lots of philosophical ground is inevitable because whenever we straight up, we lose philosophical education. Also, when we read other off case like theory, we also lose philosophical education. Second, and this is the second is not true because when I read a pig, I can still contest the framework. If I manage to doing the pig doesn't fall under your framework, I'm still gaining philosophical education. Your ace points that actually I won't answer the ace points. Your beast points that kills the beast points kill advantage ground. One cross by my number one response. You bring up multiple ones to ace points that you lose access to your original advocacy. You're overstating how hard reading the pig is. You can simply actually get up on your feet and think for a while why doing this specific part of affirmative is bad why doing the specific part of affirmative is good if it's actually bad. It shouldn't have included it as part of the affirmative in the first place. It forces you to research better for the topic. The one that's key to education because it forces you to actually look through the topic literature. The B point that's key to fairness because it ensures affirmatives actually have better affirmatives. The B point is that you can't leverage our offense against pigs. That's bullshit. You can simply, if you're prepping up on this, you read the topic literature, you shouldn't have to be struggling with pigs. Your sequence reciprocity cross-apply, that was the answer to above. Predictable limits. One turn and the pace increases that because I limit the entire debate onto one specific issue, which means that we get to learn more about that specific issue. That outweighs your predictable limits argument because the limit's arbitrary. Everyone has a different assumption of what a predictable limit is. However, we can all say that when we debate more, that increases the depth of education. And second, my counter-education solves for a lot of their issues. They sometimes are disclosed, which means that it has to be on the wiki. There are a certain number of picks are disclosed. The beast one has a solvency advocate that severely limits down the number of picks I can read because literally no people actually advocate for a pick except for what I advocate for. The sequence I limit the number of picks I can read to a specific read to, which means that I can't read everything that you talk about, like reading a specific word, picking out a specific word, or like picking out a comma or something. Second, the third is that you I can see competing interpretation, but that means that you have to prove that your interpretation is better than counter interpretation. Your argument about me, this means that your argument about not having to prove this specific pick is good. It doesn't make sense because it's a question of competing interpretation. If I win that my counter interpretation is predictable enough, that means that you have to prove that my specific counter interpretation is not predictable, not simply picks in general, because we're debating different interpretation. At 4 turn, I increase the amount of research because I force you to actually look through the literature instead of sitting on your lazy asses and just assume that your affirmative is the only affirmative there is. That's a big thing going to education because the majority of education we gain from out of rounds because in round because we have structural constraints and also my counter interpretation solves for all your research instead of arguing on real world one turn pieces is how real world decision making happens because if, for example, in Congress there's constant editing of bills when the House sends a bill up to the Senate doesn't like this specific portion of a bill, it will cross it out and send it back to the House, which means that this is exactly how real world education happens, not for your satisfying some bullshit. That's only how regular people only regular people make decisions. However, that's not how policy decisions get made. I say there's alternative solvency days point that we can gain more real world education in future rounds. The point that we can gain real world education in other parts of this round. For example, the AC we don't have to gain it via picks or the next argument times 2 1 is inevitable. All arguments are AC point that all arguments become the these points that some debaters are simply faster. And second, this is not cheap. You can simply leverage your AC offense. If you have a poverty advantage, you can simply say why giving a living wage to people under 25 is better for poverty. It's not like you lose all your AC offense.
Okay, that was, how long was that?
4:48.
Okay, That wasn't bad. There's a lot of different things we can improve, though, to make it absolutely baller. So the first thing is you absolutely cannot drop the argument under real-world education about how this is also a substantive reason you vote AF on the pick, because the AF just needs to prove that its option was good enough.
Okay.
Okay? You just cannot make that drop.
Okay.
So the argument needs to be there.
Wait, what
That
was the argument that
the argument is that Smith proves that the model for debate Smith proves that we say we ought to do something if it's good enough, not if it's the best option. Which means that the AF just needs to prove that its plan was good enough.
shit. Okay.
So the response needs to be that this incorrectly assumes that the way we decide debate rounds is based off real world processes.
Okay, sure.
Right? You should say there's a ton of things that happen in real world decision making that isn't appropriate in a debate round.
Uh-huh.
Like, what's different between debate and the real world is that debate is a competitive activity.
Right.
Right? And the obvious example that comes to mind immediately is bribing. Right? In the real world, oftentimes people believe what they want to believe or because they're bribed to believe it, but that doesn't seem to be how we make debate rounds function.
Okay, yeah.
Right? Like, you can't just hand your judge $40 and be like, yo, vote AF.
Maybe sometimes you can make that happen.
I mean, maybe you can, but I think we'd all agree that that's a pretty awful model for debate. Right? So that's the first thing, is you don't want to drop that argument. The third thing is, I think there's alt solvency for when you can learn the satisficing model for debate,
I didn't
for
get
life.
that. I don't understand. Wait, can you?
No, you responded quite well to it, right? So your first argument was exactly what I would have said as well, which is that picks are how real world decision has happened in policy making, right? And the example you gave about policy was fantastic. Like, everything you said there was perfect. What I would have liked is for there to have been some sort of weighing between why we should specifically learn policy education over real world over
Okay,
like
I was gonna do that until the standard was phrased as policy education. Then I was like, okay, that's probably directly.
the way it was phrased is in terms of real world education.
Okay, yeah, that's what I got originally, but after like the Smith part, it was phrased as policy making education. So I was
So
like, okay.
I think what you need to do is you need to point out several reasons why debate as a form is better for policy education than it is for real world education, right? The A point is that you have alternative methods in which you can learn the satisficing model. Like, if it is indeed the case that most people have the satisficing model for how they go about making their actions, there's a high chance you already have that model in your life. This is a unique opportunity for you to learn the different model.
Okay.
Your own card says that there's less people who abide by that other model, which means that this is a unique forum in which we can learn that other model. We may not use it, but at least we know how to do it then.
Sure.
Right? And the B point is their own card indicates that there is, like, that other people are this way, and they were that way prior, and most people don't do debate, which indicates that debate will not ruin your ability to have the satisficing model.
Can you repeat the second part?
Yeah, so basically the Smith card says that most people, studies show, are abide by the satisficing model in terms of whether they should or should not take an action.
Most people.
Right? That's what the card literally says, that most people use the satisficing model for action. Right? And so what I'm saying is that if that's the case, most people also don't do debate.
Okay.
Which means that which means that we as debaters can also learn the satisficing model outside of debate.
Okay.
There's no reason we should learn that model in debate.
Sure. Wait, is it satisfying or satisfying?
Satisficing.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's yet another warrant for why this is a unique opportunity to learn policy education, and that would be uniquely good.
Yeah.
I think also now, so the next complaint I have is the way you're dealing with time skew is not effective. You have this argument on the AT advantage ground argument about how if it was actually a bad part, like if this plank if what I'm picking out of was actually bad, you shouldn't have included it in the AC. Like, you had an opportunity to write an AF, that was good. You can cross apply that to time skew while you're making it. You can say, cross apply this to time skew. If there is a time skew, it's your fault because you should have been ready to debate all the parts of your AF that are a bad thing and defend against them. Does that make sense? I also think there's couple of like really easy and sort of bad uh, arguments that people relatively like regularly make on the PICs debate that you should be also making. One is the parallel turn about advocacy or about more specific ground. So it would be a turn on ground that says you get more specific ground now because I defend a specific scenario, right?
Yeah.
It's similar to the argument we saw Ben make against me in the video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Second is an argument that the AF gets infinite prep time and gets like 1 AR frontlining, which means that because the AF gets infinite prep time to construct what it thinks a good AF should be, that the negative needs picks, or at least at the very least, picks are fair.
Sure.
Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think also you're making a huge mistake. The last real big complaint I have is conceding competing interps. I think that you're completely misunderstanding how the original argument works. The original argument is spike against reasonability. It actually leverages competing interps, right? The way that Tom has written this argument, he has written it such that his point is, look, like predictable limits is a question of norms. It's a question not of this particular pick, but it's a question of the concept of picks in general, which is what a competing interps model would include. If we were to look at specifically this pick, that would be more of a reasonability model for debate. I.e., should this particular pick be included in the debate space? Tom's point is that that question, though potentially important, is not relevant to the shell. Because his shell is that the very practice of reading something plan inclusive ruins predictable limits. So even if this particular pick is an instantiation where it's okay, in general it's not okay. And we're trying to set norms. So in general, the norm should be that we should not have it.
But I guess my argument was sort of that if we wanted to set norms, we would decide between the interpretation and the counter interpretation. If my counter interpretation is better than the interpretation, then that means that we should default to the counter interpretation as a norm. This should be an instance. Even if picks are bad in general, this should be an instance. Like if you default on competing interpretations, you should vote for the interpretation that better sets a norm for the debate, right?
I mean, I think so, but maybe we should. Maybe what I'll do is I'll email you this, and you can look at it and think about it at a deeper level. The way I think about it is this: I think that had you gone for reasonability and also included a counter interp, you could have said, "Look, Tom makes a big deal about how the practice of reading a pick violates predictable limits, but that requires him winning competing interpretations, because if it's a question of reasonability, then we don't care about the practice in a general sense. We care about the practice in this particular debate round. And my counter interpretation is fantastic on the question of whether this particular debate round is skewed. It's definitely not. He had an opportunity to engage with the pick, and he decided to uplayer with theory instead."
Sure,
Does that make sense?
yeah. I'll think about it.
Okay. Other than that, I thought you dealt with the ground standard quite well. I think your counterinterp is too fast.
Oh, sure, yeah. Okay.
Your counterinterpretation needs to slow down and provide all the specific planks. It needs to let me catch them all.
Sure, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It worked out okay here because you like went through all the planks in your counterinterp later on down on your number 2 response for predictable limits. But in a different round, it wouldn't have worked out for you.
Sure. Yeah.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
Also,
Yeah, that's what you said. We go slow on
yeah, I also think it's worth your time to try to squeeze in a 15, 20-second big picture reject arg versus reject debater.
Sure. Okay.
Cool? So this speech was pretty good. It was fairly efficient. It could have been more efficient, obviously, and I'm sure they'll read you.
I feel like I was pretty efficient.
I saw you, like, you were wanting to make more responses, like on the A point and the B point on fill ground, and I saw you be like, no, okay, I already responded to this next.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the type of recognition we want you to start having, which is that you are oftentimes over arguing against issues.
Yeah, I think that you built that into me. When I was reading, I was like, yeah, I already responded to that. I don't need to respond to the impacts too.
Right. And so the other thing then is like becoming more efficient in terms of word economy and also cutting out arguments you don't need. But that will be something that happens over time.
Sure.
Okay. Cool. So do you have any questions on this?
No, I'm good.
So now, if the 2 and R...
Can you email the flow that you had? Because there were some arguments I made up on the spot.
Yeah, I will absolutely email you the flow. There are 2 things I want to point out to you. The first is in terms of how difficult this 2AR is now going to be on the theory debate. Right? If the 2AR wants to go for theory, it has to deal with a lot.
Right.
So the point is that the 2 and R should focus on quality arguments, but it should focus on also making a quantity of them so that the 2AR has a really, really tough battle. The 2AR essentially has to be perfect. Make sense? The second thing I want to point out to you is that this round is not over. Right?
Well,
You still need to win a substantive out.
Right, yeah. That's why it was 440.
Right, and ideally we can get this closer to 4.
Okay.
Now, the other big picture, the other last big picture thing, the last thought for this video is that it's oftentimes quite strategic if you're reading a pick and you don't uplayer with theory to read theories in RVI.
Oh, sure, yeah. Oh, wait,
So that way the 2NR can win on the theory debate. So a decent 1N could be the pick. If you're very well frontline on your pick, this is a great 1N. A pick for 3 to 4 minutes, 1 to 2 minutes of the RVI, and then 1 to 2 minutes of picks good.
That make it really hard for the 1AR because it has to respond to the argument.
Right, you're just basically fortifying the picks debate. Right, you're setting yourself up for the picks debate.
Unless they choose to respond substantively.
Right, and that's the point of having a lot of front lines for your pick. Right? If they respond substantively and you lose on the substance of the pick, shame on you. Like, you should have been able to win that. Cool? Okay, so 2NR on picks makes a lot more sense.
So, wait, I still don't understand the purpose of the RBI. So this, presumably the substance should have been, like, really easy for you to deal with, right? Because, like, well, I guess it depends.
Well, remember how I told you when we were talking about the ideal 1AR here? How the 1AR would have a minute to 90 seconds of just like analytical responses on substance, right? Because if you have analytical responses on substance, it forces the 2NR in this situation to deal with that, right? So even if the responses are shitty, you have to invest time explaining why it's shitty.
Fair enough.
Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the value of the RVI is it really puts pressure on the 2AR if it's going to go for substance to deal with theory. Like, it doesn't let the 2AR just kick theory and go for substance.
Sure.
Right? Because the 1AR does theory plus substance. The value of the RVI is it forces the 2AR to give lip service to theory.
Sure.
The downside of the RVI is it often incentivizes the 2AR to collapse to theory.
Right, yeah.
But that's fine because presumably if they're going to collapse to theory, you already did a lot of work on it in the 2NR.
Sure, yeah.
Make sense?
Uh-huh.
Okay, cool. So that is a really good drill to do on the 2NR on picks, and I hope you found this useful.